Ashe. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, and you are listening to Bangles and Headdresses, a conversation rooted in reclaiming matriarchal traditions and reflecting on how we return to the wisdom of the roots of our ancestors and how we navigate today's world. And today we're joined by Melody Capote. Welcome, Melody.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, folks, Melody is not just a Bronx native, but she is the executive director of the Caribbean Cultural Center and a friend. We've known each other for a very long time. Melody, how are you feeling these days?
In spite of all that is happening in today's world, I'm feeling hopeful. We have to be hopeful and have made a real conscious decision not to move in fear. So I'm feeling good.
As you should, as you should. And so, the topic is always matriarchy. So what comes to mind when you hear the word matriarch?
Gosh, for me, it really is the strength from where I come from. The lineage in my family, both on my father's side and mother's side, are all strong women, strong Black women, strong Latina women. And I come from, as you know, Elizabeth, a history of institution builders. And so, as you mentioned, I now direct the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute that was founded by my aunt, Marta Moreno Vega, and whose right hand was my mom, Laura Moreno. And between the two of them, I just understood the notion of institution building is what you've done here with Uprose, but it's also what you've done in creating home for your family, right? Institution building for me started in my grandmother's house. And I tell this story of being in her home in El Barrio, and I'm actually born and raised in El Barrio and then moved to the Bronx. The rooms were all pinks and blues and yellows, the walls in my grandmother's apartment. The furniture had big floral print sofa covers. And I never questioned it, but I also never fully understood why those colors. And it wasn't until my first trip to Puerto Rico on my own, not on my own, but you kind of grown, I was 13, and it hit me on this flight to the homeland. All the houses were the blues and the pinks and the yellows that immediately took me back to my grandmother's home. And I raised the question afterwards, speaking with my aunt. My mother would do the same thing in the house. There were just these touches, these things that connected them to home, because Mommy was born and raised in Puerto Rico. So this was kind of her being in the gray jungle of New York. This is the way she brightened our home. But it also was my grandmother's way of connecting us, almost without having to say it, to the homeland. So for me, the word matriarch raises just the women in my family who did, in their very kind of caring ways, these phenomenal jobs of connecting us to our root cultures and our native lands.
I love how you talk about color because I feel that my early experience of going into the Caribbean Cultural Center is I could smell it before I got there. There was sage, there was Palo Santo.
Yep.
And then, and something interesting. So right now, where we're living in the age of media, social media, where people are learning a lot about our traditions and about our history, and they are sort of putting on the clothes of a moment, and they are adorning themselves in a way that honors our lineage. Back then, there was no internet. And I remember walking in and smelling it and then hearing the drums. And then at the table that I would approach for the Caribbean Cultural Center events, the tables were covered with mud cloths. They were covered with kente. Yep. The women who were greeting us were wearing bangles and headdresses.
Headdresses, absolutely.
They were wearing bangles and headdresses, and they greeted us in, and it kind of felt like we were going into the past as we were walking in. And that was, and it's just really important, like if you can just share that time, when did that happen? Because people are learning that today, but that was part of who you always were. And I remember seeing your mom. I remember seeing Laura, and I remember seeing Malta. All these women were at the entrances. You walked in. So you felt like even though it was a Caribbean cultural event where there were people literally from all over the world. You felt like you were walking into your house, but also walking into the past. That must have been intentional.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think, first of all, I realize now you and I know each other over 30 years, right? Because we're now at our new location about 15 years, and you're talking about the space when we were on 58th Street.
When you were in Lincoln Center, right?
Yeah, down that area, right? The Lincoln Center
that
area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's important, by the way. That's important because that is an area that was called San Juan Hill, where Puerto Ricans were pushed out by Robert Moses.
Yep.
But there you were, this sort of like centrifuge of Caribbean culture in the middle of a place that was becoming so westernized and so gentrified, but you were holding it down there. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Between what happens with the displacement of people, the San Juan Hill notion, and the building of Lincoln Center, because let's talk about it. And when we came to 58th Street, the area was still known as Hell's Kitchen. The building that we purchased then was a shell of a building, and we purchased it and we renovated it a little at a time, right? Poquito a poco, but it was ours. And what we started noticing 10 years in was the power of gentrification and how all these things were happening around us. And we were like this little engine that could, and standing firm on 58th Street and 9th Avenue. The notion of coming into this space and feeling like you were at home, we get that all the time, even today. People walk in. I know for certain that a big part of it are the people in the organization, right? The folks who welcome you at the door, from the receptionist on up. It's a very welcoming and warm space. And there's a very intentional way of designing what we do and what we do and why we do it, because that notion of Sankofa, having to look back, right? And fetching it in order to move forward. So there's always this way of folks coming in and feeling connected because there's something familiar all of the time. And when you walk into an institution where you see yourself, right? I see myself in you, you see yourself in me, in the artwork, because again, even what's displayed in our galleries, it's not art for art's sake, but the art that we display in all of our exhibitions is an art of resistance. And it's an art that says it's grounded in the very communities that we all come from. So you come into this place and you feel very connected. You feel like home because there are familiar elements. And then the things that are unknown or new for the individual walking in, yeah, that's what we want, right? This is a learning opportunity. It's we want that switch to turn on quickly for folks to make the connection. Now, as we're entering our 50th year, in the last 3 years, we've been uncovering.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
50 years is not a little thing.
50 years.
It's something that has to be lifted and celebrated.
And we are, and we will. But in preparation for the 50th, we started to uncover our archives, 50 years of photos, slides, videotapes, beta tapes. But the young people in the office are like, what are these slides? What is this, right? CDs, occasional papers, exhibitions. We just pulled out an exhibition we did, in 1990 of the Young Lords of complete. We remounted an exhibition that we used with the help of Felipe Luciano, one of the founders of the Lords, and Iram Maristani, who we recently lost, who was kind of the official photographer of the Lords. And this is all of his work. So the staff, who are all fairly new and young, as we uncover all of the things that we've done over time, are all realizing everything new ain't so new. We've done it, right? You mentioned earlier being in the Lincoln Center area. We used to produce an annual event at Lincoln Center called Carnaval in New York.
See, I remember.
And those were the days when Lincoln Center gave us maybe 2 hours to present because they weren't ready. They weren't ready for our folks. They weren't, we still weren't seeing ourselves in the major halls, but an outdoor festival for 2 or 3 hours, sure. Now look at the world music, global music presentations that places like Lincoln Center and Celebrate Brooklyn are doing.
But I remember you bringing in people from Bahia.
We did all that.
From Honduras, the Garífunas. Like literally before that was trending, you were doing it. And they were literally coming from all over the world and doing bringing people up on stage at City College. Oh my God, I remember I was in my 20s. It was like yesterday.
Yep.
And it really, for me, it shaped, it was an extension of what was happening in my home. But it shaped me in understanding that, you use the word resistance. And I want to lean into that word a second because, now that we're dealing with extreme weather events and climate change, people talk a lot about resilience. And the word resilience really means bouncing back as if the past was normal. Mm-hmm. And the past for us is enslavement, colonialism. The past for us is oppression on so many different levels. And so when people are resilient and they go back, the past isn't necessarily a good thing when you're coming from a place like that. But the word resistance is really sort of like capturing all of these things that are the things that gave us strength and nurtured our spirit and moving them forward. So I want you to talk a little bit about that because I think that I just remember the Caribbean Cultural Center being a place where I felt like I was part of that intergenerational continuum of culture and power. I thought that was the heart of cultural activism. So I feel like you all, for me, represent that in the way that is most intersectional because people who are very Western thinking are very siloed in how they think about culture and how they think about community. So, share what that evolution was like for you. Because you, like me, you were very young. We were very young. We were both very young. And we had these women who were our elders who we looked to for guidance. What was that journey like for you? Like, how do you, so share that with me.
I'm starting with the word resilience. And I really was very intentional in not using that word because we're constantly being applauded and looked at for the resilience.
For being strong.
Because we're going to bounce back because we're strong and maybe not strong enough, but y'all did it. And I think that we move shifting from that to grounding ourselves in what the resistance has been historically for us as a people. I mean, it's not, if the work of the center, which looks at advancing racial and social justice and equity for African descendant people. We're very clear of that in our mission. If we got there, if we did that, we good. We could close down. We could, we did that work. And yet, and we saw it during COVID, right? And our artist community, our cultural workers were all kind of wanting to be prepared for when the doors opened again and wanting to be as prepared and as ready, particularly as artists, as their white counterparts, right? And the notion or the language of, and you heard it in the media, going back to normal was never good for our people. We didn't want to go back to anything. What we needed to do was create a way forward that provided a platform in a way that we would be more effective, more cohesive, and using art as a tool, right? Folks tend to use culture and art interchangeably, and we know for us, it's culture first, and art is a part of culture. Language is a part of culture. Our foods are a part of culture. Spirituality is a part of culture. And so as a cultural institution, using all of those mechanisms and ways of life, because you just said it, this isn't something we do and walk away from. We walk in this.
Yes.
We walk in this power. We walk, I like to say, we live in magic. We are magical people. We are a sacred people. Our breath is sacred. And when our young people, our own people hear that and believe it, we move so differently in this world that it's powerful. And knowing that, again, in that notion of looking back or recognizing, re-emphasizing that what we do is grounded in African traditions, in indigenous practices and traditions, that there is a magic, and I don't say magic like a magic show. I mean, there is a magic about how we move and how we, look at all the folks now, others, I'm going to do the othering, that are now coming to working with herbs and wanting to, all the practices that we come from, that naturally was the way we eat, the caring of the earth. As an Orisha priestess, knowing that for us, all of our deities represent a force of nature. So the practice of caring for the river, caring for the ocean, caring for the earth, the air, is all part of our practice.
Right.
The one who doesn't know gives it another twist and makes it this kind of spooky
They
other thing.
They demonize it, which is what they've always been doing.
Always done. Mm-hmm. Indigenous practices, the same thing. So I think through our work, I think I may have gotten off place with your question, but I think through the work and this practice of resistance is a way that we live. Somehow folks always think that means being in protest mode, being on the streets, and those who feel I'm with y'all, but I don't want to be in the street, or I can't. There are other ways of being able to support movements, right? Secondary ways and tertiary ways of being able to be present and active in a practice. So I think for the work that we do as an institution, the work that you're doing, the ways we've partnered, because the other thing is coming to you and saying, this isn't a strength of our organization. This isn't an expertise of our organization. But Liz, let's get together and have a conversation around climate justice because of the work we see ourselves doing in the Caribbean.
Yeah, which is tremendously important. We just, while you're talking, I'm thinking back to what I experienced in all of these events, how you were struggling to get funding because all of the institutions that were getting the funding were Eurocentric. But in these spaces where you were centering Blackness before that became kind of the trend, you had people from Peru, you had people from Honduras, you had people from the global South coming together who understood that nationality was a creation of colonialism, but understood that we were the same people who had moved around that part of the Caribbean and the Americas.
Exactly.
And then fast forward, you see Bad Bunny at the halftime award, right? A halftime football thing. And oh my God, I'm saying that so badly. But you see Bad Bunny and people are excited and they're acting like they're discovering us for the first time. Like they're seeing it for the first time. And what was magical to us, what was deeply spiritual to us is that this is who we've always been.
Exactly.
That difference exists. And we celebrate that difference in our families and our cousins. That's who our people have always been. Mm-hmm. That's what we look like. That's how we express ourselves in a variety of ways. And I just think that cultural expression that suddenly went global really sort of captures the spirit of everything that has happened at the Caribbean Cultural Center, which is that door was open and you could be coming from Nigeria, you could be coming from Lagos, and you could have a conversation and share the same language as somebody who was coming from Cuba, right? You could call something the same thing because you would be using the Yoruba language. That continuum is powerful. The fact that we've been able to maintain cultural traditions and make them sort of like the thing that makes it possible for us to walk in our power, that's really unique. And I think that when you're in it, when you're born into it, when you grow up in it, you forget that the legacy that we're talking about 1,000 years of pataquis, right?
Exactly.
So you're doing this. It's and you're also coming out of movement spaces, out of the Young Lords and the Black Panthers, because it births the opportunity for you to do this in a place that is becoming increasingly Eurocentric, and your institutions are not funded at the same level. How does community and how does the matriarchy keeps you going to the point that now you're celebrating your 50th anniversary?
It has not been an easy journey. And you would think that with this track record, with this history that the organization has, particularly around the work we've done in advocacy and clearly advocacy and not lobbying, but advocating for equitable distribution of funds at the city and state level. I mean, it does not exist. It is not equitable. It is taxation without representation. And we have to remind folks our own as well. I mean, these are our tax dollars that are not going back into the very institutions that need it the most. And so there were a few things you spoke to where we look at the power of coming together as diaspora people and looking at the common thread we share, right? And our root culture being in Africa. Because in places like Peru and Mexico and other places where Africans arrived, it's not talked about.
Right.
Right, so
I'm
it's
thinking about
now-
like Guayaquil in Ecuador. I'm like, those folks look like us.
They look like a Veracruz.
Sí, Veracruz,
so you look at
Tampico.
different places throughout
Yeah.
the Spanish-speaking, excuse me, particularly the Spanish-speaking Caribbean and countries. We'll find you. You're there. You don't have to go back too far, right? Y tu abuela, ¿dónde está? Just look back a few generations to see where those roots are. But there's a connectivity that happens through song, through prayer, again, referencing, say, the Orisha tradition. We did 3 years of international conferences that dealt with this practice. And even in places like Brazil, where not everyone spoke Portuguese, and there was I remember hearing the story from my mom where they were gathered with priests and priestesses in terreiros in Brazil, and they brought priests from Nigeria and priests from Cuba. And there was a level of frustration at how they couldn't communicate with one another. And finally, one of the Madre Santos, the leaders, matriarchal houses in Brazil, in the terreiros of Brazil, stood up and started singing a song, a prayer, and my hair stand.
Everybody knew.
Everybody knew it. Everyone started singing it, and it kind of broke the ice, right? And my mother says, and the songs and the prayers just kept happening. And the more it happened, you could see the shedding of kind of all those frustrated moments of feeling like they could not communicate. And I think it's in those moments, those golden moments where, again, we kind of see each other and connect, that we understand colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you understand why Portuguese, why Spanish, why English, right? If we come back to kind of mother tongues, and the acknowledging of differences, there are differences. And that's where most of the energy has always been put on us, to focus on the differences versus where we have commonalities. You mentioned earlier even, I'll make reference to the food. I like to use the term, same pot, different spoon, but it's all the same.
Yes.
And so once you start to make kind of those simple connections through food, through prayer, through song, the universality of the drum, right? In Native cultures, in Asian cultures, in African cultures, in Latino cultures, we understand that they're just ways of communicating and connecting folks that really don't need words.
Right. We had one of our guests, Patrick Dewar, talking about the drum and talking about how that is the conduit. It's how we've always communicated through time and across nations, I was thinking while you were talking about how I once heard that in Nigeria, in order for them to understand ancient Yoruba, because they've become so westernized, they have to come to the Caribbean.
Yes.
They have to go to Brazil. They need to go to the Caribbean to learn their ancient language, that we maintained it as a form of resistance. And the colonial process in Western Africa made it so that they lost their language. They became Christian, and they have to study in our countries in order to learn their old language. Have you heard that too?
Yeah, and the conditioning. I mean, the power of colonialism is real. That very first year when we took the conference to Nigeria, the headlines were voodoo practices come to the motherland.
Wow.
Right? Because there's so much with the Episcopalian Church and the Catholic Church and all of these impositions in places where really there was a real disconnect to those practices that come from the land. And so that was the very first conference that we hosted in Nigeria. That was kind of and it to the point where folks were like, why are you all bringing that here? Mm-hmm. We're like, it came from here. It belongs here. What are you talking about? So it's very powerful, very powerful.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I didn't know.
So that loss of language, that loss of spirituality and sacred practice, I see them as different. Mm-hmm. They're connected, but they're different. And again, it's kind of how we show up in the world, how we walk in the world. And I wake up every morning and my prayers are thank you. My prayers are thank you for the sacred breath and for showing me a brand new day. And with that, I'm good, right?
Yes.
We were speaking earlier before the show about water and the power that water is for us as just people. As people, we all need water. But the cleansing effect of water, the blessing effect of water, even that, right? Before leaving in the morning, I pour a few drops of water to cool the road, to cool my way, and I'm good.
My mom was, if you're having a meeting, put out a glass of water. If you're having a fight, put out a glass of water. The water is a conduit. It is a receptacle that absorbs.
Yeah.
Water is so important for the mother, for Mother Earth. And we're seeing now that water is being privatized. We're hearing that the arrival of AI is going to literally take not only so much of our natural resources of land and energy, but also water. And so these are things I think that our ancestors predicted would be happening at this moment.
Absolutely.
They were telling us that we were going to be living in a moment where the most sacred thing, which is central to life, is water. Would be taken from us. And so there is this connection that goes across generations in the stories of our ancestors that we maintain and our lessons on how we move forward. So, we talk a lot on this podcast about the lessons that our ancestors have shared with us about what a path to being a matriarch is. Are you a matriarch? Are you embracing being a matriarch? Is this something that you are becoming? How do you see that in yourself?
I will say that initially, had you asked me that question a few years ago, maybe not, right? I'm understanding more and more the power that lives with me as a matriarch. Of course, being a mother to my own biological children, having raised a daughter who's not my biological daughter, but I raised her for 9 years before having my own. And I am still the first person she calls when she needs something. And then the extended family of young people who've come through the doors of the organization who, they show up and I'm like, oh my God, we can't get rid of you. They keep coming back. They come back in the form of board members. I have board members who grew up at the Lumumba Bandele, who grew up at the center.
Yes.
Nayoka Acevedo, Marinieves Alba. I mean, so many young people who've come through our doors who we've always had very good friendships, but I think the more we're all maturing, I'm seeing differently. And so I would hope that, yes, I am a matriarch. As I mentioned earlier, this kind of the building of and sustaining of institutions that have been the legacy of my family. The notion, what you mentioned earlier with Patrick speaking about the drums, knowing that we hold that within us as women, those of us who've been fortunate to carry children, the first drum beat our children hear is our heartbeat, right? And that we, from the moment that they're within us and outside of us, right? Because we were also mothers to communities of children and young people who come into our spaces, and you mother them.
Yes.
Right? And so that's a really important part of who I know I've become over time. I think sustaining the institution as I have, having been director since 2018, has been critical to me personally, because this started out as, looked kind of as a family business with my aunt and my mom and myself being involved. My brother worked for the organization. My children have worked for the organization. But it's a place where I think almost like a womb, that the center has this very kind of matriarchal feel to it, and home feeling anyway. So yeah, I would say yes.
It is a humbling experience. I remember thinking of my mother that way, of people coming to her. I have those from all over the country, people calling her, texting her, always asking for her guidance. And I had a moment a few years ago after my mom passed where I was in that situation. And I sat at my desk thinking, oh my God, I've become my mother. Like, people are contacting me from all over the country, from all over the world, asking for my guidance. They're coming in, and we've always been intergenerational. We've always been part of that continuum of leadership. So I do have a question that I want to ask you as our time starts coming to a close. there are things that you talked about regarding culture and values, and we're seeing all of that continuing and evolving. How do we want our culture and values to evolve without them being erased and without them being appropriated? What are the things that we can do to protect those things that are sacred to us?
Well, I think we just came out of a staff retreat last week. And because, again, the staff is young, is growing, is new. One is, and I'm sure you're seeing it in your organization, is the commitment to the work. And what do we do to protect it is to protect the institutions that we are building and have built. There is an effort on our part now, again, as we're entering our 50th anniversary, on how do we shore up a portion of the funding for the organization that does not rely so heavily on philanthropy and government, but that relies on us. And so we're creating an individual donor campaign that everyone has an entry point for. We're not looking for millionaires. We're not looking for donors with big bucks. If everybody, I remember this being a conversation with Marta 30 years ago, where we were working on a building campaign, and speaking with her, we said, imagine if every person of color in this city donated just $1.
Yeah.
To the organizations that you love and support.
I believe you have to invest in people and institutions that you believe in.
So that if we were to do that, we would know that the sustainability of our organizations, it's our responsibility. How do we assure those things, the cultural grounding of institutions, is that we have to take the time to say, I'm going to support this organization. I'm going to donate. I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to show up. Because it's all just so very, very risky. It's always been risky, but in this time, in this political climate, it is very risky. Being erased is real.
We have done a lot with a little.
Yep.
And that grassroots organizing and fundraising is real. And we are told that we need so much to get things done. And we have always been able to not only embrace abundance, that's not just, the language of the time, but that's when you think about who our people were, where they came from, what some of the challenges that they had. Well, how did they make it through? How did they put food on the table? How did they get to dress up as beautifully as they did over generations? Those were people who had a firm belief that we could take care of each other. And so that's what I think this time is calling for. If you had an opportunity to speak to an ancestral matriarch and ask a question, have a conversation, or thank them, what would that conversation look like?
Oh my gosh. It would definitely be my mom. And I would thank her for connecting us to our Puerto Rican culture. Always the music, the food. My dad was a New Yorican, and he would tease her when she would do things that he found to be like hicky, when you were a hick. Mommy always kind of, with the food, the music, the language. I would thank her for insisting that these things live in our home and live in our hearts, because now, I speak Spanish because of my mom. I understand the language because of my mom, the history because of and these would be just conversations that we would have. It wasn't being in school. It wasn't a history lesson. It was just the stories that she told, the storytelling piece, right? Which also has become very faddish. Oral traditions in our communities always have been, right? And so the stories we heard from her as a Black Puerto Rican woman, my mother was a Black woman with a master's degree who gets to this country in the early 50s as a school teacher in Puerto Rico. And none of that was acknowledged when she got here.
It's amazing.
Right? And, made something out of nothing all of the time. And I think that's another model, as we were talking about our own cultural institutions. Whether the funding is there or not, we make it happen. And I think that's a really good thing that we're able to do that, but it also sends the signal that we never needed what we asked for in the beginning. And that
what we deserve.
That's the problem, because it's what we deserved. We're not asking for a handout. We are asking for what we deserve. And so Mommy always taught us, donde comen dos, comen cuatro, right? Where two eat, four eat. And that's kind of still been our notion in how we run our institutions. But my mom, it was tiny but mighty, and just had such a power. Everyone who came in the organization would say, you know, if she was on fire, everybody would be like, whoa, Laura, this is not the time to approach Laura for a check, you know? But when she was open, it was just constantly educating folks and informing folks. And I would thank her. I would want a moment to sit with her one more time to express my gratitude for instilling in us the pride in being Puerto Rican and Black, because she was very clear the racism was alive and well, even on the island, and how we had work to do. And you saw it through her commitment to the organization as well.
My mom knew your mom.
Yeah.
And I remember long before I met your mom, knowing about your mom, with how my mom smiled whenever she talked about your mom. And so she, and when you met her, there was a certain amount of humility. Like, you just felt like you were just being hugged, you know, because she was that warm. I think what you said about having the right to those resources is really important, because Absolutely. I think that what they've done to us from the beginning of time, when they started colonializing, taking over our lands, is that they took the land, they took the resources, they took our labor, and then everything they gave back, they acted like it was something that was some sort of help that they were trying to give us, and they had our people set up to fight over trinkets, fight over small things, when so much has been extracted and taken from us. And so this narrative that somehow you have to pull yourself by the bootstraps, or that somehow we're hooking you up and you haven't earned it and you haven't worked for
You're doing us a favor.
Is that they're doing us a favor, is a way of sort of brainwashing people into thinking that we have been sort of sitting around waiting for these resources from folks who are being kind, when in fact it is the least of what people can do, because of how we've arrived to where we are right now, what was done to our people, to our nations, to our culture, to our resources, even to our natural resources. So I think that ground setting is tremendously important.
Yeah, and it's that notion
I think people forget.
Always having us ask permission, and we're asking permission for what's rightfully ours.
Yeah, you see it with the elimination of affirmative action. It's like suddenly it's literally a setting of the ground, right? It's basically of the playing field. And people thinking, oh, you didn't earn it. No, everything that you have from a place of privilege came on the backs.
On the backs of Black and brown people.
Of our people. Yep. And so the only people who didn't earn it was you. And now you're trying to convince us that somehow we're not supposed to have those resources. So it's an important resetting, and also speaks to how we're comfortable in our own skin, how we feel and walk in our power. I think those things are tremendously important. So Melody, thank you so much. This has been so joyful. I think such an important conversation, that people understand that there's legacy, that there's history, that we didn't just suddenly sort of climb out of TikTok with information about, this is how we are this is how we walk with our ancestors. This is something that has history, and that comes from struggle. It is political. It is historical. It is cultural. True. It is spiritual. It is all the things that we are the manifestation of. So I am really, really grateful to spend the time with you.
Thank you
right here. I think our mothers are smiling.
Down on us for real.
And looking at us saying, what? Look at the matriarchs that we created. Look at the queens in training, right? So I think that, I think they're smiling right now. So we are having this conversation. This is our March conversation.
Right.
March 8th will be International Women's Day. So it feels sort of appropriate that we are not only talking about the rise of the matriarchy and how we are redefining what power looks like and how we engage in community and how we build institutions and build community power, because we're celebrating women. We're celebrating women. Yes. So yeah, this is International Women's Month. I don't know about the day. This is International Women's Month. So Melody, can you share your handles so that people know where they can reach you and get information? The 50th anniversary is coming up. People are going to want to know more about that. Can you share that with our viewers?
Sure. Our Facebook, on Facebook, we are Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute. On Instagram, it's at CCCADI. That's 3 C's, CCCADI. And our website is cccadi.org.
Gracias.
Thank you.
And I want to remind folks, I want to thank you for listening to Bangles and Headdresses. You know, we hope you enjoyed this conversation with Melody. Make sure that you hit like and subscribe and join the conversation on our Instagram and TikTok accounts at Bangles and Headdresses, all caps. Until next time, Ashe.